Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Greg Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reski.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
We're doing something special tonight. Usually we talk about our research before Jim and I teach our Bible studies on Saturday morning. So we kind of include you in on when we're looking at big themes and lessons from the passages that we're going to be teaching on. And then I will often broadcast the actual teaching that we do. I heard somebody tell me one time, they said there's three talks. There's the talk you prepare, the talk you give, and then the talk you wish you would have given.
That's right.
And so tonight we're going to talk about the talk we wish we would have given, which Jim was up last weekend, and he spoke on the book of Judges and Ruth, did an excellent job in my opinion. So Jim, before we get to the talk that you wish you would have given, or maybe things you wish you would have included as you reflected on it that day, which I find myself doing every time because I know I can improve and get better. What were some of the things that you really felt connected well?
First, Greg, good to be with you, and I'm super excited about this new segment we're going to try out on the podcast because I've heard you say that many times about the talk I never get it right. The talk you want to give, the talk you give, the talk you wish you'd given, or I butcher it every time, but it's something like that. And it's so true. We do these things. And I think in this podcast format, people watch kind of how it comes together, all the kind of conversations. They're both trying to wrestle with something and figure it out. They can hear the product when we actually do kind of give the talk. And then whenever we do it, we come together afterwards in the parking lot. We say, how do you think that went? I don't know. I left that part out. And I think that doesn't make sense. And I wish I'd said this other thing. And, oh, that's right. I forgot to bring this whole section up. Or there's always something. And then you look back and think, what did I say? Did it make sense? And did it really accomplish what I thought it would? So anyway, I'm super excited about this segment. It's a post-mortem to kind of review. And I think anyone I don't know who listens to the podcast, but anyone who is in a speaking role or a teaching role or has to do this, they'll relate. And let's say, I know what you mean. And it gives us a chance to kind of fill in some blanks and fill in some gaps. So. But anyway, your question, I thought the big picture, I thought the big thing I wanted to get out of it was the big theme of the book of Judges for me was a big surprise as I was going through it. I mean, we did a prep talks about it. We were reading about it. And then the idea that the Judges is all about these spirals where the nation of Israel is, seeks for the Lord and does okay. And then they go astray. And then they're enslaved to some other foreign power, and then they cry out to the Lord, and then God raises up a judge, and they're delivered, and the whole cycle starts again. And everyone knows that's the kind of part about Judges, and everyone knows the stories about Gideon and the stories about Samson and Delilah. But reading it again it's such a not just cycles but a downward spiral. And I think I got this part out. I think the part about that if you read it just the cycles, you can walk away as a Christian saying, the Christian life is lumpy. It's never perfect, and it's always kind of, you have your ups and downs, but it's like cycles, but you keep progressing, you keep pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. But no, it's way worse than that. It's their progression in the book of Judges gets so dark, so black, and they end up, not to give the talk again, Greg, but I mean, they commit sins that are worse than what happened at Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is actually one thing I'm glad we're talking about tonight, because I'm not sure that I got this across the way I wanted to. And I think I did, but I'm not sure I did. And I think that the part I was trying to get to across was God was showing them, look, you pledged your fidelity back in the book of Joshua. You said, we'll do it. Joshua says, this is what you got to do. Choose this day. And they say, we will. And Joshua says, you're not going to do it. God's really holy. You don't know what you're asking for. God's way holier than you think. And then, no, we'll do it. They had all these pledges, and they fell so badly into this deep sin, worse than the Canaanites, worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. The part I was trying to bring out was that is a window into our own soul, that they God was showing that your darkness in your own soul is worse than you think. And as a reader today, reading the book of Judges, that's relevant to us as readers, to me, when I say, what is God saying about my soul? I think I got that across when I was talking, but the point, like, it's the connection between what they went through to me today, the reader, personally applying it and inserting myself in the story as the people that had that downward cycle, right? So
I thought you did get that across, and I thought that was brilliant, especially coming off the book of Joshua, and you did this comparison about how Joshua was like so full of like life and light and victory, and then you hit Judges and it just starts off bad in that cycle. But it's not just, like you said, it's not just this friendly cycle that most people would think. The cycle that we go through as Christians, it keeps taking us up and to the right. It's a cycle of maturity.
Right.
But you did a good job pointing out, no, this is much worse than that. This is not a cycle to maturity. This is a trajectory of sin that goes downward. In other words, that illustration that God is way more holy than we ever can even think that he is.
And Joshua got that when he was given I don't know if I said that. I can't remember now if I said it or not, but Joshua really got that when he was saying, you say you'll do this, but he's really, really holy. He got the upward line. I don't remember if I said that or not.
I actually don't remember if you said that or not either, but I think you did. And then, but then it's the downward line. We are way more sinful than we ever thought or imagined.
Than we want to admit to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And here's one thing. I think they would have completely, I don't think I said this, and I wanted to. They at the beginning would never have believed it while they were pledging their fidelity, while they were, telling Joshua, "Oh, we'll do it. We'll follow the Lord, and we'll be good about it. We'll keep all the rules." Yeah, you bet. And if he said, "You're going to fall darker than one of the darkest and the people in your whole history that you know about, Sodom and Gomorrah, you're going to be worse than them," they would never have believed it, right? And I think it's so easy that, like you always say, the default mode of the human heart, the religion, and we think we're decent people. And God says, you don't know the darkness in your own soul, the blackness in your own soul. And I don't know. That's what I was trying to get out. Like it's not just those people over there, this ancient story. It connects to us now to say, God's trying to say, just like them, they thought they would never do something that bad, but they didn't know the darkness of their own soul, and we don't either.
Right. You also did a good job bringing out the fact that these judges were not really godly people necessarily.
Right.
They were not heroes that we necessarily want to emulate.
Right.
The one judge who says, "Hey, whatever comes out of my house, I will sacrifice to you." And he knew that there's only two things in his house, his daughter and his wife.
Well, so that one, some guy at the Bible study came up to me afterwards and said that he had read some books about Middle Eastern history. And he said, what you don't know, Jim, is that oftentimes they would keep livestock in their house. And they let them roam and graze during the day, but they would bring the livestock in to make sure they're under lock and key and is safe from wolves and bears and lions and bears, oh my, whatever they were attacked by. And so he said, in that case, because of the way they did in that culture, something could have come out of his house, one of his livestock or something. I said, oh, okay. I thought he was just trying to, and I made a joke about it in the study, bump off his wife because he thought, I'm only living with my wife and daughter.
Yeah, it's crazy that he would make a vow like that.
It's crazy, right? That was crazy anyway.
I mean, knowing that any living thing that came out of his house was probably something that he loved very much, and to sacrifice, and then not only does he make the vow, he keeps the vow.
Yeah,
and he actually sacrifices his only daughter, which is just nuts.
Exactly the evil they were. But and here's one thing I know I left out at the very end, because I was about to say that that judge, which is Jephthah, he did exactly the evil that the Canaanite people were doing, that God was angry at. That's why God was judging those people,
Yeah,
right?
they were sacrificing their children.
But remember at the end where I was talking about how that awful, awful episode with the Levite and the concubine, that's where they hit rock bottom. They commit the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they start the civil war, right? And they all the other tribes could go against Benjamin, and Benjamin counterattacks, and tens of thousands die. And then they go back and they destroy the Benjamin village, they burn it, and tens of thousands of Benjamites die. I want to say this, and I didn't say it. That God is at that point. He said, I started this by using you, the nation of Israel, as a tool of my judgment on these other people for their sin. Now I'm using you as a tool of judgment on your own sin.
Wow.
We just read it like it's just civil war, right? Oh, they start fighting each other. Like, no, God is like, listen, I'm still using Israel as a tool of my judgment. I'm just using it on Israel, on yourselves, because you're the ones who are really meriting and deserving that now.
Right. And that's that downward spiral. That's how bad things got.
Right.
Well, what else did you think when you walked away and you reflected?
Yeah, a couple things on that front about the judgment, the people, and that kind of stuff. There was another little minor point that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to get in, and I didn't. Afterwards, in talking to some people, that kind of came out. That whole idea of like, how could God do this kind of genocide in the Bible and the people there? And I was trying to bring out the idea that, if the Bible's not true, there is no God of the Bible, then nothing's right or wrong. But if God of the Bible is true, then we are all of us under sin and judgment, and they were, but so are we. And we all deserve death and hell because of our sin, right? And there's a story towards the end of the book of Judges where remember I was saying how there's just random fighting. It wasn't directed by God as a tool of his judgment. It was just random fighting.
Yeah.
And there's a story where the tribe of Dan goes into some small town, and the text takes pains to say they were kind of a quiet town, minding their own business. They were kind of far away from any other town to get help from the other town. I mean, it really makes them sound like these are innocent victims. And the tribe of Dan attacks them and kills them all anyway. And the Bible does not seem to condone that attack at all. And it seems like it's because at that point, the Israelites were not acting as a tool of his judgment. They were just, doing land conquest. And so the text says it really paints it like these are just innocent sufferers, like it was not at all God's intention to do that. So that was one thing I didn't. It was kind of buried in my notes. I thought I'll never have time to bring that up. So that was one that. Oh, but there was one. I'm sorry. One other thing that I also I had it all ready to go and teed up in the notes, and I didn't find the right moment to work it in. When I was prepping for this, someone sent me an article. It's supposed to be a comedy article about. I don't know if I told you this or not, but it was about some guy who said, "Oh, bring back the God of the Old Testament." And I wish the God of the Old Testament was filled with vengeance, and he was filled with, anger for unrighteousness, and he was, the flood that wiped out all kinds of people, and then the judges, there was people like they wiped out, and that's the God we need today. And then in this article, and the person who sent it to me said it's comedy. It's just meant to be funny. He went on a long rant about people that disagreed with him on some political issue. This Christian writer. And so it went on like in a long rant about whatever this issue was. And I won't mention it now because half our listeners will say he was right and half will say he was wrong, whatever the issue is. So
right.
Whatever the issue was, he believed in it strongly. And the people who disagreed with him, he said, I wish the God of the Old Testament would come back, the righteous God, because he would smite them and wipe them out, like the people on the other side who disagree with me on this one particular issue. And it was meant to be comedy. I get that, kind of. But I was going to mention it because I thought if you really think if your prayer is, God, I want you to bring down. Here's the way I should have said it, Craig. If I think my prayer is, God, I want you to bring righteous judgment into this room right now. All you people in the front row better step back because there's going to be a lightning bolt coming on the podium any second. Right? It's like, God, smite the biggest sinner in this room, and I want you to do it right now. That's if Christianity is true.
what you're saying is that we think, again, it goes back to like we think it's for that righteous indignation is going to fall on everybody else except us.
That's right.
But
That's right.
that is like such foolish thinking.
It's so anti-Christian. It's so anti-gospel. It's like, if the gospel, that's the point of, there's a whole point of this, the talk, that I understand the downward trajectory of the sin in your own heart. If you let the Bible come in and God convict you that way, right? And otherwise you say, oh, tisk, those Old Testament people are awful. And today, those other people who disagree with you, they're just terrible. Yeah, I wish God's judgment would come down on them. And then you say, no, if God was righteous about it, he'd start with me, right? So
that's right.
Anyway, that was a little side thing about the article, and I didn't get to that, so that's okay.
Was there anything else?
A couple little things, like when someone came up to me at the beginning and said, you got to speak more slowly. And I tried. And then someone at the end came up and said, hey, that was good. You spoke more slowly, but I'm still not sure I did. And I need to work on that. So that's a tiny little thing. But, whenever you're speaking in front of people, there's that kind of mechanics you want to just do better at. The kinsman redeemer thing, I want to talk about that. And then the single line at the end, someone commented to me that they were confused about how I did that. So let's do the single line thing first, because maybe that's fundamental. When I finished up, so I at the end I said, so look, here's the thing. In the middle, I was saying is the lesson from Judges, you should like eradicate the sin in your life, and kind of held it out there as a question. And I didn't want them the guys to say, yeah, that is the lesson, because I was setting that up and saying that I don't think that's the primary lesson. The lesson is how deep our sin is. But at the end, I tried to come back and say, because you are redeemed, because you are forgiven, and God has completely approved in the gospel, all your sins are wiped away. Your standing is 100% complete. Now, therefore, in proper sequence, as a result, out of gratitude, eradicate the sin in your life. And someone came up to me afterwards and said, wait a second, all that sounded great until that last moment, because at that last moment, you went back to the single line. In other words, the single line we always talk about in this podcast is when you say, Jesus starts me off in the Christian life. I'm justified by faith. I get a fresh start, and then the rest is up to me. And Greg, on this podcast, every time we're always saying that's not it. That's with it, right?
Yeah, it seems that's what most people think is it, because it appeals to the default setting of the human heart,
right?
Which is bent on self and performance and pride. So anyway, so what did you think about?
I said, right, the way it came across at the end might have been saying, so go back to the single line, Jesus has redeemed you, therefore perform for him. I hear now.
I knew that you weren't saying that.
I know because we talk about this all the time, but it was interesting. Someone came up to me and said, so wait a second, what are you saying? So what are you saying? Are you advocating then this Jesus has redeemed you now through your hard work and effort, climb the single line and eradicate the sin in your life? And no, that's not. And I said, I should have been more clear. What I was trying to say is focus on him and what he's done for you. Understand that in him, he's wiped away not just wiped all your sin, all of his righteousness is given to you. Your standing in him is 100% complete. There's nothing you could do to make it any better than it already is. So therefore, out of gratitude, eradicate the sin in your life, because you hate it. You want to love him and you want to walk with him, but not to earn more points, not to get higher up the line, not to do anything, out of pure service to him. And in fact, even when you're doing it, Greg, when you eradicate the sin in your life, that's your dotted line on the bottom, right? That's like you're barely aware of it. Right? You're not. Yeah. And then if you are, you're kind of losing it, because now you're saying, look at me, I'm really doing better. And you're getting more spiritual pride. So
that's good.
Yeah. So I was a little bummed. That might have been confusing at the end. And it did not mean for it to be.
One of the ways I would describe this if I was talking to that person, is it's the difference between you have to do something and you get to do something.
Mm.
So religion operates on the principle of I have to. I have to do this, this, and this to earn God's favor. But when you understand the gospel and you realize that what Christ has done for you, and you live out of that gratitude, it's not that I have to work on my sin, eradicate the sin. I get to do it.
That's great.
And so it changes like your motivation.
Yeah.
You're doing it. It's the same with like reading your Bible. Sometimes how many people read their Bibles because they feel like they have to, and if they don't, God's not going to bless them.
Right.
But if you switch your attitude towards it and you say, no, I get to read my Bible, I get to learn about God, I get to pray to him, then you're doing it out of gratitude because of all that he's done for you. So you can see two people outwardly, they look exactly the same. They might go to the same church, and yet one is operating from the have to mindset or heart principle, or the other one is I get to. Same with church too. Like I don't have to go to church. I get to go to church.
Right.
But it's just so easy. Again, that default setting of our human heart is towards religion, which is more like, oh boy, you have to do these things to be a good Christian.
Yeah, we take the Christianity and the gospel and kind of turn it back into that religion, right? So to be a good Christian, you got to perform for the Lord. You got to do this. You got to. Right.
Yeah.
And
the thing is, the big thing I thought you brought out really well, and I'm so glad you did it, is you just talked about we are way more sinful than we ever thought. And the thing about that is it makes salvation so much greater. Because if we think we're pretty good, then the cross just isn't as meaningful. It's not as powerful.
That's right.
But if you really understood your sinfulness, and if you really understood God's holiness, you really understand you need a savior, you need a redeemer. And you brought this out in your talk. You said that was one of your big things. We need a redeemer.
Right.
And so, and that's why that the message of the cross becomes so powerful for the believer, the follower of Christ, because we realize that without the cross, we're hopeless.
Right. That's why I was trying to say, we don't need more good advice. Buck up and fly straight, clean up your act. That's every religion, right? And we can pledge, I'll do it. I will. I promise this time for sure. And we're not going to do it. I mean, we should really try, you should do those things. It'll convince you of how holy God's standard really is. Right. But then I tried to, in a Q&A, this came out, Greg, trying to say, look, I don't want this dark, depressing emphasis totally on your sin the whole time, because you have to also balance that with the redemption, right? You have to say, a holy God has bridged the gap between me and him through the cross, right? So there's incredible joy in the Christian life. If I just focus just on my sin, it's morose. It's just dark all the time. It's guilt-ridden depression, right? What I need to focus on is the joy of my salvation, and all that's been lifted. And he became sin for us, right? Those great verses, right?
But you did a good job bringing out the two stories in Judges and Ruth that point us to a redeemer, which is Samson, even though he was very imperfect, all the parallels and how he points to Christ, because there's so many things that about his life that point to Christ. But then even a better example is the book of Ruth.
Yeah. Let's talk about the kinsman redeemer. By the way, do you remember in our prep meeting, in our prep podcast, we were talking about Samson, and you were saying, any other types of Christ you see in Judges? And I was saying, no, not really. How about Samson? No, I'm not sure I can see it. So I appreciate you mentioning that, Greg, because only later I went back like, oh yeah, of course, he's obviously clearly there.
But he's still not a great example.
No.
I mean, he was so flawed, but it's so cool that in the Old Testament, there's little glimpses of Jesus.
Yeah.
that are things that point us to Jesus.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm saying the message is not, if you think is be a hero, yeah, you're trying to put yourself in the story as one of the redemptive judges, right? And you're in need of a redemptive judge, not being told by the book of Judges to go be a redemptive judge. So
Right.
different takeaway. But let's talk about the kinsman redeemer, because I think I really did flub that part up. And so if anyone's still listening, it's nice to be able to correct the record a little bit.
What did you say that someone corrected you on?
So what I said in the talk, which is I said I thought that Naomi and her husband Elimelech, I think it was, sold the land in Canaan and then moved to Moab, where the two sons married the two daughters and all that. But when Naomi came back, the kinsman redeemer had to buy back the land. And so the kinsman redeemer rule, which does come from Leviticus 25, gave the next of kin or a close family relative the ability to buy back the land and then give it back and restore it to Naomi. But then someone came up to me afterwards and said, no, factually, that's not exactly what happens in the book of Ruth. In the book of Ruth, they leave Moab, they come back, and then Naomi chooses to sell the land. And because in Ruth 4, Boaz is going to the other kinsman redeemer who has the right to buy it.
Right.
Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. He has a right to buy it, but someone else is a closer relative. And he goes to that closer relative and says, Naomi, who has come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. Right? So
she had to sell it because she was penniless, right? She needed the money.
Right.
And so this was probably one of the reasons she went back to the land, right?
Well, maybe she's like, we're dying here. I've got some land back there I can sell. But I was factually wrong when I said they sold it before they left and went to Moab. So clearly they hadn't done that. And if I was better prepared and read it better, and I would have not, God willing, I would have made that kind of an error. But they came back and sold it, which changes a little bit the meaning of what a kinsman redeemer really is.
Yeah. So, well, this is like how every newspaper has like corrections.
That's why I'm excited about this new segment.
We're
flawed, failed, amateurs. Right? Well, you're the professional, right? You're in full-time ministry. I'm the amateur.
We're doing like fact checks.
That's right. That's our fact checks.
But neither you or I mean, for me, for sure, like I don't claim to be like a theologian or Bible scholar. I'm always willing to be corrected on things.
Well, I will say our guys are pretty good in the Bible. There's 100 guys in the room, by the way, when Greg and I do this, and they usually, once in a while they do, but usually do not come by and say, you got this dead wrong. They come back quietly afterwards and say that. Remember I got that reference to some Psalm wrong in one of the talks I was giving, and someone corrected it, but on the fly they corrected the reference. But we had a joke about that. That was okay. Yeah.
So anything else about the kinsman redeemer you want to mention?
Well, so I think it was not about that, Boaz had the right to buy back the land and give it back to Naomi. He was going to be able to buy it from Naomi and then keep it in the family. And then the big thing about it is carrying on the family name. So if Naomi had just sold it to any old passerby, then she would have gotten some money out of it, but then her family line, the whole family just fades into nothingness. But the kinsman redeemer idea is that you get the land and then you will marry the widow who owns the land, and you will then be able to have children and then carry on the family name. Now, Naomi is too old, therefore it fell to the next person, which was Ruth. And so Boaz, when he gets the land, gets Ruth, and when they have children, then that carries on to Naomi's family. So that makes sense of the last passage I was reading, which is that when they go to Naomi and they say, it's so great you have a son today, the woman of the village, right? Because now you have, well, Naomi didn't have a son, Ruth did. Well, but Naomi, and your family will continue because you didn't just sell the land to any old passerby. And I think that's a big part of the kinsman redeemer thing, is keeping the land within the family. And I think actually the other part that I understand now is that the family name Like they would have taken on Elimelech's family name, not Boaz's family name. So this whole kinsman redeemer rule was a way to say we're going to keep this family going. Not even though that the Elimelech, the father of the family had passed away.
Very good. So in the New Testament, Christ is often regarded as an example of a kinsman redeemer, because as our brother, he also redeems us because of our great need. He's the only one that can satisfy. And then in Ruth chapter 3, verse 9, we see a beautiful and poignant picture of a needy supplicant, unable to rescue herself, requesting of the kinsman redeemer that he cover her with his protection, redeem her, and make her his wife. In the same way, Jesus bought us for himself out of the curse, out of destitution, and he made us his beloved bride, blessed us for all generations. He's the true kinsman redeemer of all who call on him in faith.
That's great. I wish I'd read that before I to the Bible study, because you're right.
Yeah.
Her prayer to him, when she says, "I heard about this. Cover me with," that is saying, "Please marry me." But you're right. It's like us going to the bridegroom as the church, right? As the bride saying, cover me and cover my sins and be my kinsman redeemer. That's great, Greg.
Yep.
There's a theological point that I think if I'd have brought it up, I would have gotten lost in it about the hypostatic union, right? The idea that that notion of Jesus is a kinsman redeemer means is part of the support for why Christians believe he's both God and man, because it takes someone from the human race to be a kinsman redeemer. It's not just some spiritual angelic being that God didn't just sacrifice an angel and said, well, that was painful. Here's an angel.
Right.
It was one of us. It was a human being. It was a kinsman redeemer. He was a kinsman redeemer. So, but that's kind of like in over my head theology to get into that stuff. So,
yeah. So we'll have to think of a creative name to call this segment.
Postmortem. What's the post-op? I don't know what. I like it. I think there's so many things you say, oh shoot, I wish I'd one more thing. Remember at the whole thing about the action movie when you're at the beginning, I set that up and I brought it up in the Q&A how you're reading Judges like an action movie, you're shouting at the screen, don't do it. And I meant to say that, and I get the very end of the Q&A, bring it up. God's watching our action movie all the time saying, don't do it. We're the sinners. He's saying, don't do it. We do it anyway. Right. So it was sometimes when you're
That's
speaking.
good. Did you come up with that on your own?
Oh yeah.
The action movies. No, that's a really cool thought. Like, the book of Judges does read like an action movie and but then tying it to our lives are like an action movie too. And how so many times during the day when we make we're tempted and we make the wrong choice. He's like, don't do it. Don't do it.
We talked about this.
Those are great movies when you're sitting there in your seat and you're like, no, don't open that door. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Right. Right.
Oh yeah, that's good. All right. Well, this is our first segment. We'll come up with a creative name for this.
Yeah. some running metaphor, pre-op, post-op. That's a kind of a medical. We'll think of something.
Before, during, and after.
That's very straightforward.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.